All right. Hey there, and welcome to the webinar. I am running behind today. I am getting started about 10 minutes behind, and I apologize for that. I had to run some errands for my son, and that took a little longer than I anticipated. So I am going to launch these slides and we are going to go ahead and get started. And of course, this is up on replay on YouTube if you're needing it. So don't hesitate to put any questions you have in the chat. I'm happy to answer anything. Don't hesitate to reach out to me. You can always find me, Delane at DelaneMD.com. I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have. So let's see if I can get this shared appropriately so you can see slides. And we will go from there. Always getting this to share. It's kind of interesting. I'm so sorry. It takes me a minute to figure out the combination of things that I need to be doing. All right. Okay. So again, I'm glad you're here. I'm glad you're taking some time for you. I always like to remind women that time is the most precious commodity that we have. Like there's no amount of money you're going to trade to get time back once you spend the time. So when you spend time on your health, I think that recognizing the value of what you're spending, and then also recognizing that what you're doing, like make sure it's worth it. Make sure that you're taking the information that you are getting and you're utilizing it effectively for your long-term results that you're looking for, okay? You are spending time to get information here. Make sure you're utilizing the information that you get in a way that shows that you have spent time that's valuable to you, because time is a thing that you'll never get back. So make sure you're being intentional with the time that you spend. You can always post questions in the Q&A or in the chat. There will definitely be opportunities throughout to ask questions. So today we are going to talk about how to, like the basics for better blood sugars. Like how do we get to a point where we are seeing better blood sugars? How do we change our lifestyle? How do we change our diet? How do we change the things that we're doing so that we can start seeing better blood sugars? We are going to talk about the cause of type 2 diabetes, and it is not, lots of times women will think it's because of our blood sugars and that's diabetes, and it is not. And the reason that you have not up until now gotten the results that you're looking for your blood sugars, like the reasons that you're not seeing better blood sugars is because you're focusing on the blood sugars. And what you need to be focusing on is the root cause of your diabetes, and that is insulin resistance. We're going to talk about what that means, what causes it. We're going to talk about how our food and the things that we put in our mouth lead to insulin resistance. We're going to talk about how to evaluate the food. Like, how do I look at a food label and know that this is going to be a problem and this isn't going to be a problem? And then lastly, we're going to talk about the two primary tools that I teach women for improving blood sugars, reversing insulin resistance, normalizing their health, getting off their meds, all of the things that we're looking to do. So let's dive on in. Let's talk about the cause of type 2 diabetes. Type 2 diabetes is caused by insulin resistance. In order to understand insulin resistance, you must understand insulin or a normal insulin function. You have to understand what insulin should be doing normally if you're going to understand insulin resistance. And then I do want to talk about the root cause of that. So insulin is a hormone that is produced by our pancreas in response to glucose being in our bloodstream. And what insulin is meant to do, if you see this, oh, wait, let me get a pointer. If you see this diagram, right, this red receptor, this red complex here, you can see this diagram or this picture, this ball, the red circle is insulin. This almost looks like a chimney type thing. That is the insulin receptor. And then you can see this blue port over here. This is a glucose channel. This is a depiction of a cell with an insulin receptor and a glucose channel. What should be happening is this ball binds to that receptor. And you can see here in the second picture that it's bound. When that binds, what should be happening in the presence of insulin, glucose should come inside the cell. This port opens, glucose comes inside, and then the machinery, the things inside the cell, can start burning off the glucose as fuel. It uses it as fuel. This is what should be happening in your body in the presence of insulin. Each cell should be responding this way. Most cells, I won't say each cell, but most cells should be responding. Insulin is present, it binds to the receptor. That binding of the receptor opens the glucose channel. The glucose then comes inside the cell burns it off as energy. This is what should be happening. So in insulin resistance, what ends up happening is the glucose does not move into the cell. So you have a bunch of insulin, and maybe insulin's even bound to the receptor, but it's not opening this channel. Many times it's because that receptor is blocked, meaning that you have so much insulin in your system that insulin is always bound to the receptor and no longer, like it binds and it triggers this response, and then it releases so that it can bind again and trigger the response. If it's always bound, it stops triggering the response. And so sometimes that is the process that's happening. But other times it will bind and it will send the response, but the response here inside the cell is blocked. So whatever is the response to tell that glucose channel to open is not happening. Either way, no matter which one of these two mechanisms are at play, what is happening is this glucose is not moving inside the cell. And when that glucose does not move inside the cell, it is allowed to get really high. The glucose levels climb really high in the space outside the cell. When that happens, we pick that up as physicians as high blood sugars and diabetes on your finger sticks on your lab work. This is why insulin resistance is the root cause of your type 2 diabetes. Insulin resistance is not only the cause of type 2 diabetes. Insulin resistance is the cause of a lot of different diseases. Insulin resistance is what we call hyperinsulinemia, high insulin level in the bloodstream or in your body. And it is the root cause of the majority of our chronic illnesses. It is either the cause or associated with 85, maybe 90% of chronic diseases. So diabetes, high blood pressure, cholesterol, high cholesterol, polycystic ovarian syndrome, low testosterone, dementia. It's even to be thought to be the cause of tinnitus. There's association with GERD. There's all sorts of diseases that hyperinsulinemia is either the root cause we know it is or associated with. So if you're looking, and I've always promoted living a naturally healthy life. I am a physician. I know about meds. I know how they work. And I do not believe that there is better living through chemistry, that somehow we humans in all of our glory are creating a compound or a drug that somehow keeps us from having to live within the restraints or the boundaries of our normal biology, right? Like there's not a drug that you're going to be able to take that's going to make underwater breathing okay. That's just not going to work because it doesn't match our biology. Similarly, there is not a drug or an inhaler that I can find as a physician to give you so that smoking cigarettes is not going to be a problem. Cigarette smoking just does not match your biology. That's all it is. And in the same way, high insulin level and the food that causes high insulin does not allow you to live a naturally healthy life because it just doesn't match your biology. Nobody's right, nobody's wrong. It's just the things that cause hyperinsulinemia or high insulin or insulin resistance, they simply don't match your biology. Learning how to figure out how to match that biology, that is crux for improving your blood sugars and reversing your diabetes. So I want to make sure if you have any questions that you have an opportunity, please put them in the chat. Please put them in, if you're listening on a replay, please put them in the comment box. I'm happy to answer anything. I will see them. If for some reason I don't, send me a message, Delane@DelaneMD.com. I'm happy to answer anything. So scheduling a better blood sugar assessment call is going to be the quickest way for you to determine if your insulin resistance. Do you have hyperinsulinemia? What foods are you eating that might be causing this? Where is this happening for you? If you're interested in finding that out, if your goal is to come off your meds and fix your diabetes and lower your blood sugars, if that's where you're at, you really need to schedule one of these calls so that you can determine what you're doing, what the best places, like what's the most focused place you can make a change to see better results, the results that you're wanting. You can schedule that. You can always use that DelaneMD, that www.calendly.com/DelaneMD. That will allow you to schedule your better blood sugar assessment call. You get access to my calendar. You can get that scheduled. These are Zoom calls. They're 45 minutes. You can be on camera. You can be off camera. It doesn't matter. You can bring me your labs. You can bring me all your numbers, bring me all your data, and I can evaluate it and let you know where the quickest way, like where is it that you can put your effort and get the most changes for it. So let's talk now about how the food that we eat causes our type 2 diabetes. What is it about the food that we eat that's causing the high insulin, the insulin resistance, and leading to the type 2 diabetes? So again, insulin is produced by the pancreas. You can see this little yellow figure here on this diagram. That is the pancreas. These green dots, that's insulin. Clearly the red tube, that's your bloodstream. When we eat food, it causes our pancreas to release insulin, and that insulin gets absorbed into our bloodstream, and that causes our cells to open up and bring glucose inside and burn it off. But recognize that insulin response is different based on the different macronutrients you eat. So if you're eating fat, you have very low insulin response. But if you're eating protein, you have a moderate insulin response. And if you're eating carbohydrates, you have a pretty significant insulin response. That's the highest of all the macronutrients that's the highest insulin that will give the highest insulin response. So if you're wanting the most exaggerated insulin response, carbohydrates are going to get you there. So altering the way that we're eating these foods to lower the insulin response is what's going to help reverse your high insulin levels and your insulin resistance. That's the key. This is the part that we need to focus on. Recognize in the 1950s, 40s, 50s, and 60s, there was erroneous medical studies that demonized fat. And so fat was pulled out of all the food. Like we started processing the fat out of the food. And then what we added was sugar, because fat makes things taste good and fills you up. Also, sugar makes things taste good. And if you eat enough of it, you'll get full. What we have done is we've not cut back on any of our heart disease, and we've seen a skyrocket in obesity and diabetes. And this is because that processing of our food just doesn't match our body. Lowering fat content and increasing sugar content in the, on the flip side of it, is not creating more health. Part of this is because we have to look at the way that our brain responds to these macronutrients. When you eat carbohydrate, like in a natural setting, you're out walking through the forest and you find a bush of strawberries, a strawberry vine. When you eat those strawberries, your brain produces dopamine. That's a normal response to that. And part of that is because your brain wants to remember and be motivated to go and get strawberries again, because strawberries serve your health. They're a source of energy. There's phytochemicals, there's micronutrients, there's fiber with it. There's all sorts of beneficial components in strawberries. So your body knows, hey, these are important. We better learn a way to remember where they are. And part of that way is a dopamine release. When you eat a strawberry, you get a dopamine release. When that natural dopamine production occurs, your body starts to, one, enjoy these foods, but also it emphasizes the importance of these foods. And you remember, where did you find them? When did you find them? Your body, as your brain, is heavily motivated to repeat the behavior of eating the strawberries that gave it the dopamine. It's heavily motivated to repeat that. Everybody thinks of dopamine as a hormone of like feel-goodness. And there is a feel-goodness that occurs with it, but far more powerful is the dopamine effect on motivation. Dopamine heavily motivates you to repeat a behavior that gave you the dopamine. When we have this emphasis on the dopamine and the important, on the dopamine, when we have an emphasis on the food and the importance of the food, that causes us to seek out more of the food. And we get this natural cycle of seeking dopamine, enjoyment, emphasis, seeking enjoyment, emphasis. We get this natural cycle. Whenever we change the food and suddenly the food is no longer in its natural form, but instead we concentrate the carbohydrates by processing the food, that over-concentrated processed food then is matched with an over-release of dopamine. That over-release of dopamine causes the brain to overemphasize those foods. That overemphasis leads to food desire and food fixation, focusing and fixating on food. And then that leads us to overconsume these foods, even when it's making us sick. The overconsumption gives us a concentration or an over-release of that dopamine. And now we're getting not in this nice cycle that we were in before, but there's this like chaotic snowball effect. This is all caused by the typical response in our brain. It's a normal response in our brain to foods that it's really not normal to the human being. There's nowhere in nature that you come into contact with candy. It just doesn't exist. So determining or realizing, I guess, more that this is what's happening, it's why all that brain chatter is there, is hugely powerful to fixing this. Again, if you have any questions about any of that, let me know. Certainly, these are the things that we talk about in the group program. We talk about why there is, why we continue to make decisions that aren't in our best interest. And all of this has to do with dopamine. Nothing is broken about anybody. We just have to learn to rethink that experience. So let's talk about food labels. I want to talk about two components that you will find with food labels. You have the ingredient list, which I think is very, very important. And then some of those food ingredients also will have metabolic and addictive and microbiome effects on your body. So first, let's talk about the food labels. The thing that's listed first on a food label is the ingredient that is present most by weight. So whatever weighs the most in the ingredient is the ingredient that is present in that food, that first part of the food. So here you have flour, you have everything that flour is made from: folic acid, sugar, canola, and or palm oil, and corn syrup, and then fructose syrup, and then emulsifiers, and then also leavening, and then salt, chocolate. You have salt and you have chocolate, and then artificial flavors and natural flavors and all of these things. Okay. So I want you to, one, look at this. The first thing that's on this list is unbleached flour. And that is the ingredient that's present most by weight. And then I want you to see that there are multiple names for sugar on this. So one, sugar is on there. Two, high fructose corn syrup. That's just another form of sugar. Three, fructose corn syrup is there. I'm trying to make sure there's not anything else that's sugar, although chocolate probably has a little sugar in it. So I want you to recognize there are three at least different names for sugar. And the reason they use the three different names for sugar is because if they listed it all out as sugar, sugar would be the primary ingredient in this food. And then they would have to label it as junk food. They couldn't label it as non-junk food. There are laws for that. So the funny part, or like the irony of this, is this food label is the food label for Oreo cookies. So why we have to label Oreos as junk food, that should be a no-brainer. Clearly Oreos are junk food, but that's why they do not put all of the sugars under one label. They call it multiple different things because if it was one thing, it would be more by weight than flour, and they'd have to list it for it first. And when they do, they have to label that food differently. So recognize food ingredients will have a metabolic effect. They can have addictive effects, and then they can have effects on our gut microbiome. High carbohydrate concentrations, high amounts of carbohydrates in your food lead to high amounts of insulin. That's just the biology of it. That's why these foods cause diabetes. So The metabolic effect of these is that they actually cause you to make more insulin, and they cause you to want more of them, and they cause you to eat more of them. They're actually manufactured in a way that you don't ever feel full from them. That's one of the common strategies that food manufacturers use. Understanding that these foods directly stimulate insulin function. And then understanding that the foods that are directly stimulating or messing with your metabolic function, they are also causing you to want to eat more of them. They're causing you to not be satisfied with it and want to eat more of them. Some of the additives are also responsible for blocking some of that internal cellular messaging that we talked about with the insulin resistance, right? Like the insulin resistance, you can block the insulin receptor, but you can also block the things that are happening inside the cell that are trying to get your cell to burn that fuel, that sugar off as fuel. There are things, and some of them are like the datum and then the monoacyl and diacyl and triacylglycerides. All of those things are things that block up that internal mechanism within the system. So you may bind the insulin, and it may even send off the message that goes inside the cell, but nothing is receiving the message, or they're not hearing message, or something's blocking it. All of those things are leading to insulin resistance. Lastly, recognize that these additive foods in the food that we're eating, right? These additive compounds in the food that we're eating are negative. They have a significant negative impact on our gut microbiome. So that means our gut microbiome is this big, like, garden full of bacteria that we grow inside our gut. And these are horribly important to managing our gut motility, managing our gut well, in addition to sending off metabolic information about what is going on. Some of these food ingredients, some of these food additives kill off the gut microbiome. Primary examples are sugars and artificial sweeteners, and even more than that, alcohol. If you think about alcohol, it is literally rubbing alcohol that you use on your hands. So when you're having that hand sanitizer, whatever it is, recognizing that is knocking out your gut microbiome. Certainly, if you're eating anything that's non-organic, I get that organic's expensive and it's not for everybody, but if you're eating anything that's non-organic, it almost always will have some pesticide on it, and that pesticide is meant to kill bacteria, including the bacteria in your gut. So being really aware of what the food label is telling you, what it means, and then, we'll work on then, of course, like, what do you do differently? So again, if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer anything. Things that you can do differently. One of them is that you set up this call, a better blood sugars assessment call. You and I can sit and see what, lots of times people are like, but I don't want to give this up. I don't think it's a problem. That's great. Let's sit down and talk about where there's evidence that there's a problem, and where there's evidence that there's not a problem. Then you're a grown-ass woman. You can make whatever decision you want to make with that. But make sure you're setting up that call. The link is www.calendly.com/DelaneMD. That's a mouthful. So the most effective tools that I teach women for cleaning, for improving their diabetes, cleaning up their diet, living a naturally healthy life, are twofold. What food are you eating? How do you clean up your diet? And two, how do you build muscle? So the normal insulin function you see here again, and then you see the insulin sensitivity again, or resistance again. And then here, so you can see where this binds. Insulin's bound to the receptor, but the message isn't getting over there. So sometimes it's the message is going all over and just not getting inside and the places that it needs to be. That keeps us insulin resistance. Cleaning up your diet is the primary tool that I can teach you to help improve this. This is the most effective tool. That means no donuts and yes to the grapefruits. It means no fries and yes to the avocados. It means no cookies and yes to the blueberries. You have to start eating foods that were available to human beings 10,000 years ago on the planet. If you don't, it's very, very hard for you to start normalizing your biology. The second tool that I teach that I find to be so impactful is exercise. Exercise actually improves your blood sugars in two different ways. One, it causes your muscles to contract more, and that contraction allows your cells to need fuel, and any fuel that's available in the bloodstream, it will shunt into your body. So that's one reason that exercise is so important, because it pulls glucose inside the cell in a way that has nothing to do with insulin. Okay. So that's one thing that's really important. And we dive into that in the group. But the other thing that women notice is when they're really clean on their diet and watching what they're eating and exercising, what they see is they get a huge weight loss. And this allows them to be chatty, and this allows them really to be more, they hold on to this insulin sensitivity longer, is really what it goes down to. So when your muscles are active and contracting, you are able to move glucose inside the cell in a way that is not reliant on insulin. When you do that, that effect lasts for 48 to 72 hours after the exercise sessions. That's one reason that it's really important. The other reason that it's really important to have muscle and to exercise is that the bigger your muscles are, the more glucose you can store in there. And that's really important also. So remember that those two things, these are the best ways for you to normalize, to use muscle to normalize your insulin resistance. These two mechanisms. This is why exercise is so important. Many women think that they're going to exercise off the food that they are eating and exercise off the glucose. And on some level, there will be that, but that is not the primary way that they're going to do this. The primary way that having exercise reverse your insulin resistance is going to be twofold. One, you start to use glucose in a way that is independent of insulin, and that lasts for 48 to 72 hours. And then the other way is you get more muscle. Okay. So that's going to be the two main ways. And if you have any questions about that, make sure you let me know. I used to be really resistant to recommend exercise because I think that in the past, certainly people have used exercise as a way to justify eating poor food choices. And it's almost like they would cancel it out. And I wanted to be very clear. There's no way to cancel out the food that you've eaten. Once you've eaten an Oreo, your body just has to process that Oreo. There's no way to erase what you did. And there's no amount of exercise that erases what you did. And so I was really resistant. I think that that's how it was portrayed to us for many, many years, that if you want to undo the food that you ate, that you need to exercise it off. And that's not how it works. Your body has to process that fuel, that food, that energy that you just ate. And it's not quality energy for your body. But what I do want you to hear is exercise is important. It's not going to undo what you ate, but it actually normalizes your biochemistry. Even when you're already insulin resistant, it starts to normalize that biochemistry. And I think that is really important. So if there's been tons of information released on muscle and exercise and the importance of this in insulin resistance, and understanding that and leaning into that, the scientists out there, Gabrielle Lyons is a big one, Stacy Sims is a big one, and they talk about how women are in a deficit of muscle. Like we are in an epidemic of what we call sarcopenia. So there's not enough muscle in our bodies, and that lack of muscle on our body is making us sick. Lack of muscle, that's sarcopenia. That's what we call it. And it's an epidemic for women in this country. And part of it is what's happening here is that we're becoming more insulin resistant. And I think that this is a very powerful way to improve your insulin resistance. So lift heavy shit. You got to build muscle. There's just no way around it. If you are going to exercise, do I think cardio is important? Yes, I'm a runner. I love cardio. I would do cardio all day long. But you will get the most bang for your buck by building more muscle if you are interested in improving your metabolic health and fixing your diabetes. And I just don't think that can be overstated enough. So I don't think it's possible to overstate it, I think is actually how that's said. So any questions about that? Those two things, cleaning up your diet and then building muscle. Those are the two things that really need to happen for you to reverse your type 2 diabetes. There's just no way around it. Those two things. You must stop eating foods that are causing you to have high insulin levels. You must stop eating foods that have these chemicals in them that enter your blood or enter your cells and block the insulin function within the cells. That must happen. And then you must start building muscle. That has to happen. If you're not sure, like what is happening, like you're not sure why the things that you are doing to get healthy are not working for you, you really need to set up a better blood sugar assessment call. We can sit down, we can look at the things you're doing. We can look at the foods that you're eating. We can look at the exercise you've been doing. We can look at how long you've been doing. And if you're using fasting, we can look at that. We can, if you're using nutritional ketosis, we can look at all of those things and see, is it not working and you need a different tool? Do you need to do it more consistently? Do you need to do it for longer? Do you need to be more intense? There's all sorts of areas, and I can't possibly help you with that without sitting down, having a conversation with you and looking at your numbers. So make sure you get that scheduled. Again, you can see the link calendly.com/DelaneMD. What I have told you today is unlikely to be earth-shattering to you. You know you shouldn't be eating Oreos. You know you need to exercise. Everybody knows that these things are foundational to living healthy. If it's just that, like, I can't figure out why I keep doing it, even though I know I need to not do it, that's a coaching issue. And I would highly encourage you to come to one of these calls and see if that's what needs to happen. The next step really to figuring out what you need and to working together and those sorts of things is really to come to one of these better blood sugar assessment calls. So if you have anything as far as that goes, any questions about that, get set up for that, DelaneMD.com. You can find more information there. You can always email me, Delane@DelaneMD.com, and you can always set up your own call at calendly.com/DelaneMD. That gets you directly to me. Lots of times I get questions about supplements. Recognize there is no supplement that you are going to take that, again, undoes Oreos. There are supplements that can give you some boost on what you're doing, but you really have to get clean on that dietary part, and you have to start getting exercise before you're going to make any supplement worth your time. I don't recommend a ton of supplements to my clients. I don't recommend a ton of supplements to my clients. I take a handful of supplements, and they're usually related to vanity issues. So collagen, although I don't even take that regularly. And then there are some other things that I take. But again, it's skin health that I'm taking these supplements for. That's really it. People ask me about snacks, what snacks are good. What I would recommend to you is if you're needing snacks, you probably need to get your meals more robust and more appropriate to what you need. So either adding more fat, more olive oil, more butter, maybe adding more healthy fats really to your diet are going to make the need for snacks irrelevant. So we don't need to talk about healthy snacks. I mean, certainly I'm not going to tell you anything you don't already know. Snacks that are healthy are going to be carrot sticks. They're going to be celery. They're going to be cucumbers, those kinds of things, maybe some nuts, those sorts of things. I'm not telling you anything you don't know. Those are quality snacks, recognizing that you're trying to glean as much nutrient as you can possibly from those foods. I don't recommend any snack foods, like any protein bars, any of those things. They are loaded with all of those, chemicals, those ingredients that really are not going to serve you. And then lastly, a lot of times people will ask me about dementia and like, how do I keep my brain healthy? Do understand that brain health is very reliant, like our neurons and the way that they function are very reliant on normal insulin function. And in fact, dementia is frequently called type 3 diabetes because it is really insulin resistance in our brain cells. So really, again, there is no way, if you are interested in being healthy, if you are interested in living a naturally healthy life, if you are interested in not being tied to the healthcare system, if you are interested in not being on meds for the rest of your life, you must fix the insulin resistance component. And that's what I can help you do. So set up that call, www calendly.com/DelaneMD. And if you ever can't figure that out, you just send me a message, Delane@DelaneMD.com. If you have any questions on the replay, make sure